So you all are having fun with this little Rockstar mini-series, right? I know I am, it's so much fun to make. Well, we're gonna switch things up a bit today and talk about something different. Taking a little break from all the bitching about needless controversies and non-stop roasting of one Jack Thompson. So with that established, let's bitch about another needless controversy and roast Jack Thompson.
I think you and I are destined to do this forever.
As I've made clear during this little mini-series, Mr. Jack Thompson is not a fan of Rockstar's games and has made various attempts to demonize them and prevent their success however he can. As we've also made clear, he sucks at it. However, let me clarify that this dude isn't against Rockstar games specifically, just any video games that contain what he perceives as obscene content, which is the kind of broad and vague description that people like him use as an excuse to go after such media with no game plan. For example, he tried to pull a Hot Coffee 2 a few weeks after that incident had been sparked with The Sims 2, and failed miserably. Did you also know that the National Institute for the Media and the Family, one of the more common naysayer groups that we've talked about on this show, were buddy-buddy with him until they too got sick of his nonsense? For all the ridiculous bullshit I've had to catalog up to this point though, trust me when I say we've only been scavenging the tip of the iceberg. And today we'll be sliding right into the ocean to drown ourselves with one of his lesser known, but still equally notable, acts of justice. Well after the Hot Coffee controversy had died down and our friend was about to move on to bullying Rockstar and Take-Two some more with the newly announced bully, Mr. Thompson put out an open letter to the games industry titled A Modest Video Game Proposal. After about 5 paragraphs of "only I can absolve you of your sins" type speech, and the expected slacking off of the aforementioned games industry, he proposes a challenge to his very opponent. Create and sell a game based on this exact scenario, which involves some distressed father whose son was murdered by a teenage gamer going on a revenge-fueled killing spree against the games industry, at any time in 2006, and he'll donate 10 grand to a charity chosen by one of his biggest targets, Take-Two Interactive CEO, Paul Ebler. Now, obviously Mr. Thompson wasn't expecting any of the big boy developers to follow through with this request, though in his mind it's because they're too scared to challenge his righteous causes, when in reality it's because they have better things to do than to indulge in that shit. Assuming any of them were more than willing to take the bait though, Take-Two Interactive, or any of their developers or subsidiaries, likely wouldn't be one of them, since Mr. Thompson's scenario also includes the murder of a character named Paula Ebel, as well as her husband and kids. You gotta remember, this is the man who coined the terms Pearl Harbor 2 and Columbine Simulator. I wouldn't be surprised if he expected no one to take up this request. But as this boomer has demonstrated in the past, he seems to have forgotten that, even in 2005, the internet will bite and latch on to anything in their vicinity. Several games were made in a matter of days calling Jackie Boy's bluff, most of them crappy, but fulfilling the description that he had provided in the letter. The standouts include a text-based game made by the owners of the site Old Grandma Hardcore. Don't worry, it's not what it sounds like. And what's probably the funniest entry, a GTA San Andreas mod called Defamation of Character, subtitle, A Jack Thompson Murder Simulator. This one was actually created just before Thompson sent out his little proposal, but does feature a fair amount of the characteristics he had listed within it, because your goal is to protect the children of the world from the evil ways of the video game industry. Thing is, Mr. Thompson himself was the protagonist, and the main villain was former US Attorney General Janet Reno, one of his many targets during the early stages of his law career, though that nonsense was unrelated to any of the game controversies that he's been involved with since, so why it's here, I'm not sure. Regardless, this isn't exactly what Thompson was looking for, so he refused to donate the promised 10 grand, citing that Mr. Ebler had yet to choose a charity for it to go to, but also going the extra mile by claiming his proposal was actually a satire against the apparent hypocrisy the games industry had exuded with their, and now I'm quoting him directly, willingness to target cops, women, homosexuals, and other groups with some of their violent games. Oh, I see. Thank you for clearing things up, Mr. Thompson. There's a tiny problem with that though, you fucking ingrate. As any English literature expert can tell, or any of the dummies who looked up the Spark Notes, Mr. Thompson's proposal is a reference to the classic satirical essay written by Irish writer Jonathan Swift, A Modest Proposal. Or as the full title goes, A Modest Proposal for Preventing the Children of Poor People in Ireland from being a burden on their parents or country and for making them beneficial to the public. The essay entailed the troubles that Irish citizens in poverty faced and how Mr. Swift thought that they could improve their livelihoods with this one weird trick. Just sell your stupid kids to the rich so they can devour them. He goes on to pinpoint when it would be best to slaughter the child, details specialized recipes that will utilize said child, and even back up his solution with supporting evidence like a good student would, saying it'll reinvigorate the nation's economy so that the stupid poor people wouldn't have to go to such measures ever again. I'll repeat, Thompson's proposal is just a reference to all of that. Because A, at no point in the essay did Swift ever offer to donate money to a family in need if they slaughtered all their kids, and A2, Thompson's attempt at satire is anything but. He can keep saying that it is all he wants, but his piece is far more genuine sounding and realistic than anything in its inspiration. With that in mind, considering he wanted us to believe his proposal was satire, logic dictates that his donation promise was too. And while he clarified that portion was still legit, the people over at Penny Arcade were not about to give him any leeway. Chastising Mr. Thompson for being the very hypocrite he purported the whole games industry to be, they made the promised 10 grand donation in his stead, sending it to the charity branch of the ESA, another one of Jackhead's targets, the Entertainment Software Association Foundation. Good on them, wouldn't you say? Well, Mr. Thompson didn't think so. Within the next few days, he had sent out a fax directly to the Seattle Police Department detailing a complaint about the website regarding a harassment campaign against him, citing a t-shirt being sold by the website on ThinkGeek labeled, "I hate Jack Thompson," among other evidence that he omitted from the letter in hopes of using it for show and tell later that week. Of course, this had absolutely nothing to do with their donation. Oh no, that would make him look like a petty douche nozzle. But even if this somehow was completely valid, Mr. Thompson made one little mistake. He had sent the fax to every entity possible except for the Seattle Police Department. Worse, he had mistyped the Penny Arcade URL, so if they were to receive it in its current state and go to that site, they'd probably be greeted with one of those typo squatting sites and be rewarded with some lovely malware. Penny Arcade weren't too happy about this, and neither were their fanbase, as that group themselves submitted a number of complaints against Mr. Thompson to the Florida bar. There were reports that this did result in an investigation against him for possible misconduct, but while there were ongoing ones already, they were unrelated to the Penny Arcade snafu. Despite that, all this did was spur him into further antics, as getting one city precinct involved wouldn't be enough. So he sent out another letter to the attorney for the Western District of Washington, and yet another letter to one of the state's legislature representatives, where he again mentioned the apparent harassment campaign, while adding in an allegation of extortion. How exactly Penny Arcade was extorting him, and what action was to be taken against the site for extorting him, seems to have been left to the imagination. But I'm sure he thought these folks would follow through on this based on name recognition alone. Ah yes, that Mr. Jack Thompson fellow, he's a swell guy. He could do no wrong. Who? Unfortunately for him, when the SPD did get around to responding to his complaints, they concluded that no actual crime had been committed, and if anything, this was a civil matter that they wouldn't be responsible for dealing with. They forwarded the complaint to their Chief of Criminal Investigations for further analysis, but considering that this was the last we've heard about the situation, I think it's safe to assume that they neatly tucked the complaint away into their trash bin. So chalk this fiasco up as another loss in the ever-growing list of legal failures for our boisterous friend here. And this must also mark the end of his proposal story, yes? Well, not quite. Keep in mind, this shit happened only a week or so after Mr. Thompson had sent out that letter. And as 2006 rolled around, he would get an even bigger response to his proposal than he bargained for. Several more games attempting to fulfill his very specific requirements had popped up over the next few months, but there's only one of them really worth talking about, and it's the one I actually tried playing for this video, I'm Okay, subtitle, A Murder Simulator. This was released as freeware by the newly formed game company Thompson Soft, that's cute, a team consisting of, in their own words, 3 alcoholics and 1 foreign exchange student. From that alone, you would think that this is as trashy and as crudely made as the other games, but going through it, that is definitely not the case. Oh, it's still trashy and crudely made, quite short and clunky as hell too, yet also extremely over the top and containing a wonderfully dark sense of humor. Just look at it. It's nuts. For as flawed and simple and dumb as it is, it's easily the best realized version of Mr. Thompson's fucked up game idea, as it makes a complete mockery of that very idea. It is the antithesis of its own origins. Which is probably why, despite fulfilling most if not all the requirements for Thompson's proposal, he still refused to make his donation while also noting that the team's lawyers would be contacted. Whether or not he actually believed the company was real and actually attempted to do so is also up to the imagination. After this was released, the buzz and output of games based on Mr. Thompson's premise sputtered to a halt. Likely due to it being clear that even if he got his super violent game idea commercially published by a high-tier developer, and even if all the royalties went to him, he would never follow through on his charity promise. This goes beyond being a mere publicity stunt though. His ego is so high up in the stratosphere that he couldn't follow through on his promise. Or else he would be giving legitimacy to an industry that he'd been trying to delegitimize for years. It's a lot funnier than most of his other crapshoot lawsuits and controversies, but the best thing to come out of this ordeal is how deliciously ironic it is for someone like him, this crusader against violent video games targeted towards the children of the world, to come up with such a vile and repugnant sounding game concept. I truly believe the man is psychotic. But fret not, as we finish up the Rockstar Saga, he'll get his comeuppance soon enough. For now, let me blow y'all's minds since you've likely never heard of I'm Okay, a murder sim. And for those of you who have, shut up, no one cares. That foreign exchange student character mentioned in the game's description was actually one Derek Yu, who would go on to make classic indie titles like Aquaria and Spelunky. In addition to that, one of those alcoholics also turned out to be one Alec Holaka, who helped you make Aquaria. But that's not all. He would go on to have a hand in a bunch of other indie games and eventually help create and design Night in the Woods, before eventually getting accused of physical and emotional abuse and then committing suicide soon after. Yeah, I was hoping to end on a brighter note, but I guess you gotta play the cards you're dealt with, so here's some more I'm Okay footage. Bye!